So the FAFSA is an acronym for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. The FAFSA application is the only application that students need to complete to apply for all federal, state grants, scholarships, and federal work study. We encourage all students to fill out the FAFSA application every year, and we encourage all families to submit and reapply every year, regardless of family income, because we know that some families may only be eligible for student loans, and we don't need students to take out the loans if they don't need them. But by not submitting the FAFSA application, students may miss out on financial aid that is institutional and that has a need component to it. So by not submitting the FAFSA application, they may miss out on those opportunities. So the FAFSA application was revised starting in the 24-25 application year as a result of the FAFSA Simplification Act. So the idea was to simplify the FAFSA by reducing the number of questions that are asked. With this new application, students are required to have a federal student aid ID, which is their electronic signature, username, and password, but so are their contributors to the FAFSA form. So for example, if a student is a dependent student and parents' information is required on the FAFSA form, the student's parent or parents both should request a federal student aid ID, that user ID, username, and password. The Student Aid Index is a replacement of what used to be for many years known as the Expected Family Contribution, or the EFC. And the Student Aid Index, also known as SAI, is basically just an index of eligibility, the results of the FAFSA calculation that we will use here to determine the amount of student aid that the student is eligible to receive, as well as from which programs they're eligible. So for the new FAFSA form, contributors are now required to give consent to have their IRS tax information plugged into the FAFSA application. So any contributor to the FAFSA form, so that's the student's spouse if the student is married, or the student's parent or parents, must now by law give consent to have their tax information transferred to the FAFSA form. Not providing consent will allow a family to submit an application, but it will not calculate that student aid index and will make the student ineligible for federal aid until those contributors provide that consent. In the prior FAFSA application, using the IRS data retrieval tool used to be optional. So families could data enter their information manually or give consent to have the IRS information plugged into the FAFSA form. Now in the new FAFSA form going forward, that consent is required. So families are required to give that consent whether or not they filed a tax return for that tax year. They are still required to give consent to have the FAFSA application pull their IRS data. And we encourage all students to submit the FAFSA application as soon as it is available to maximize their aid eligibility and for us to get an aid offer out to them as soon as possible. The FAFSA communication from Federal Student Aid will come to students by the email that they provided on the FAFSA application. We will begin to communicate with the students only using their COTC or their OSU institutional email account. For students with questions regarding their FAFSA application or the financial aid process, they should reach out to Student Financial Aid Services.